certified compliance system or a system that they have registered. So there's a lot of overlap, and the panelists will discuss more in detail some of the overlaps that occur, and then there are some things that are different about them. So it's a juggling act. What we're talking about also is the fact that we have to remember, being in the United States, that the FDA system is not a voluntary system. If you're making finished medical devices, you have to comply with the law, which is the US FDA's GMP's requirements, regulations. ISO 1345, directed towards medical devices, is a voluntary system. So you pay someone to come in and look at your system and to show that you're in compliance with it. So they are two different things in that the FDA is paid by our tax dollars and user fees, whereas you pay the various organizations that do auditing and certifications for their services. The other difference is that the ISO standards do make a lot of direct references towards the management of sterile devices, so single-use disposable sterile devices. And now I'm going to turn over the presentation to the panelists, and Ron's going to start with his. And I'm sure he'll be better at using this little pad.
Alrighty. Mary, thanks a lot. Appreciate you giving us the kind of the overview. One of the things that came to my mind when we were talking there is the terminology GMP. I had one of my folks at my company recently introduce or relate to something, calling it GXP, and everyone was shaking their head. What does that mean, Ron? What is GXP? And so I had to go through a whole routine of explaining, well, GMP, good manufacturing practices, GLP, good laboratory practices, CGP, good clinical practices, and on and on. So there's regulations all set up for those types of things also in the regs that we need to be cognizant of. But anyway, I want to just talk about today kind of a high level, some of the things that would be important for all of us to understand about getting involved in the medical device company and some of the regulations that we need to follow. That did it. There we go. So, the real focus behind having a quality system in place are twofold. Once you want to be able to have a good system in place so that you can have procedures set up for very important things that are regulated, like design controls, like production, and all the development work that goes into developing a product, which includes customer requirements, so on and so forth. So having a system in place in order to define within your procedures how things work is very important. I think for a lot of students, you may not realize all these requirements exist. So first day on a job at a medical device company, you're going to be asked to read all the SOPs, spend a week. And it's a lot of work to go through, and it's very complex. So I just want to point out a few of these things. Mary talked about the requirements both in the U.S. domestic requirements and international requirements, and most commonly it is the EU requirements out of the CE mark. Let's go to the next. There's a lot of similarities between the two. First off, I think from a principle standpoint, we want to make sure, or both standards want to make sure that everyone is building, designing, marketing a safe device. So that is universal across the board between both. Consistency. Having a quality system is having a business system, and having all that in place will allow folks to operate every day in a consistent manner by following the procedures, using the types of forms that are associated with those procedures. It's very important so that when an audit ever comes, and they will, either through the FDA or a notified body, what they're going to see is what you left behind in terms of a record. And if they can see that consistency, that gives them a good impression that you've done things correctly, that you know your job and everyone's following the same practices. So really key. And then last, I think Mary talked about this also. This has been in the regs for quite a while, making sure that we're following all the specific requirements for good manufacturing practices while we're building these medical devices. Okay, differences. So again, this is top level. We could probably spend hours talking about all the details behind this, but just know that the QSR has 15 sections. Each of those sections is modeled around the 1994 ISO 9001 documentation. And then in Europe, or 13485, oh, look at that, 13485, apologize for that typo there, has only 8 sections, and that's consistent with the sections that are called out in that standard. Another interesting thing between the two systems is in the U.S. we classify devices at 3 levels. Class 1 is standard controls, Class 2 special controls, and Class 3 would be pre-market approval, which is another way to market or get the FDA to approve your device. Everything below the Class 3 is you tell the FDA, here's what we've done to market the device. On the PMA side of things for Class 3, they have to tell you, yeah, it's okay. In Europe, there's 4 classes, and I won't get into all the details behind those, but just know that the Class 1 kind of follows the Class 1 in the U.S., and then the Class 3 kind of follows the Class 3 in the U.S., and there's a lot of details in between. All right. So, challenges for companies as we're putting quality systems together is, how do we comply with requirements for multiple types of products in the same development project? You may be developing 2 different devices that might fall into different classes. How do you proceed? And so, getting some good regulatory advice as far as how you proceed in that fashion. Make sure you have all the requirements set forth, and you want to pick the most stringent standard to work from and develop your product development process. And then also quality systems. How do you obtain concurrence within your organization to make sure that everyone's on the same page, because that's critical. Making sure that the operations folks, the quality folks, and the R&D folks are all in the same, are working from the same sheet of paper. And then the big buzzword, and I think we may talk about this a little bit later on, is supplier controls. There's been a big emphasis on our regulators looking at the way that we would be looking at our suppliers. How do we control what materials are going into our devices, and likewise the suppliers of those suppliers, so on and so forth, down to the raw material manufacturers. And from a contract development facility, which is where I currently work, there's some special challenges. We have customers that range from one end of the spectrum to the other, with varying amounts of requirements in between. And so being able to cater to that whole spectrum of different types of customer requirements is a challenge on our quality system. It has to be flexible enough to be able to cater to each one of those types of companies. For instance, it could be the 2 guys in the garage in Palo Alto who are coming up with a great idea, and they want to come in and they want us to build a device for them. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got some of the blue chip companies coming in with a team of people, an army of people who want to be helping out with managing the project, and they have well-established procedures that they want us to follow. So there's a big gap in between those 2 types of requirements. Every project then in turn is very different. Each one is unique, and each client's appetite for risk and how much control they want to have over the types of projects they'll ask us to do, just varies, and it will add to the flavor of the project that we'll be working on. So that's all I have today. So, all right, thanks.
Hi everybody, good afternoon. My name is Joan McCabe. I'm with a company called Cregan Tactics Medical. I came a long way here to speak, so I'm going to take one slide and do a company pitch. We are Biomedical Medical. It's a global medical device company that's a provider of products, technologies and services for medical device companies. We specialise in minimally invasive delivery systems and in the key minimally invasive areas such as cardiovascular, peripheral, neurovascular, EP, structural heart and endoscopy. We have manufacturing sites across the world, and this really, I suppose, will help with the context of some of the challenges that exist in quality systems when you have multi-sites and different scales and working in different regulatory environments. So here in California, just up in Campbell, we have a site that focuses a lot working with startups. So preclinical and products that haven't yet got to market, and as Ron talks about, you're dealing with maybe virtual companies that don't have a manufacturing. So you're listed with FDA on their as their manufacturing company, or companies that outsource design work. And again, we become part of the supply chain for that, and we're listed and need to be part of the approval process as well. In Minnesota and in Ireland, we do more high volume. Minnesota, it will be a lot of structural heart. In Ireland, we have a very large R&D group. We have 120 R&D engineers. Most of those work on contract for companies, again, the small right up to the the blue chip multinationals and the range that comes with that. In Singapore, we have a very fast growing product assembly area. And in Korea, we do some manufacturing. It's really for internal leverage for our own raw material. We have a sales office in China, and we have a project office in Ohio that really allows us to have access to key opinion leaders. So what does quality systems mean for a company like Organotactics? What I want to do is, I suppose, bring my perspective to it and say, what does it mean for companies? The given is that it means that we're in total compliance with the regulations that have just been explained. So that's just, you have to do that. But it's the complexity around it, and it's the systems and the processes and the interactions and the people that come and go and the different projects that really take the effort and that take that watchfulness of the quality system. There's a large range of regulatory bodies. I suppose FDA is up there with the most fearsome of them. But then we have the European notified bodies. We have Anvisa in Brazil, the Japanese PMDA. These regulatory bodies, they go out and audit, and they all have their own quirks and their own peculiarities, and it's difficult for companies to have a quality system, I suppose, that meets, or that they see what they want to see when they come to audit your quality system. But really the key thing is that the quality system and compliance is a given. Companies will compete on innovative offerings, or on cost, or on service, but you can't even play in the game if you don't have good quality and quality systems. So that's just the baseline. You have to start with that. And the environment that we work in, is ever challenging. So you can see here the whole, I suppose, regulatory environment around audits, recalls. On the left at the top is the amount of global FDA warning letters, and below that the OUS warning letters, and it's a really steep upward curve. The number of class 1, so that's the highest risk recalls, increasing, and 483s, which are the non-conformances by FDA. They're all just on the up. So it's a tougher world that we work in, year on year. And it's really important that quality systems are built into the whole product life cycle. I thought it was interesting this morning when Dr. Vale from J&J was talking about, when they're doing, making decisions on maybe VC funding or licensing agreements or acquisitions. I know from working, with and supporting small companies, the partner that is there for them through design and who is their manufacturer when they don't have a manufacturing, are part of the due diligence. And it's really important that the strength is there as well, because it adds to the, I suppose, the proposition that the startup has when they're being romanced by the big companies. So there's a burden or I suppose an onus on companies that are in that world, to make sure that everything is okay for the small guys. And then through the product life cycle, quality is there the whole way, and obviously through design and through manufacturing. And I like to say end of life, but a lot of products don't go to end of life. They just dribble down to a few doctors who don't like to let them go. And there's a huge challenge with that. And you've got product iterations and line extensions, and that world, I guess the quality systems has to be very agile in. So from my perspective, I just wanted to share what I think are, you know, if I stand back and say what are the three most critical parts in the quality system to get right, they all kind of link together actually a bit. So I would start off and say, you know, a design controlled process that is considering the life cycle of the part. I think in design, a big flaw is that a lot of people see the achievement of the PMA or the 510K or the CE mark or whatever you're going to as the end, but it's actually just the start. You know, so I think design control has to be considering, knowing that the product life cycle is going to continue, and it is, you know, around design for manufacture, design for reliability. So you know, you good parts, you know, in a year or two's time when the design team have moved on, that you're still going to get good parts. So I think, you know, the design control has to be really encompassing the whole product. A really strong change management process is probably actually the number one for me, because products will change and companies have to change or else they just won't survive. So, you know, you can bring a product to market and you know, it's great to be first out there and, you know, you're ramping and the next thing, you know, competitors are snapping at your heels. And then you have to, then it's a cost play, you have to get cost out, and you have to move it to a different location. So the quality system has to be really flexible for that. And finally, I think risk management is really important. Is, you know, you can't state, you know, the criteria for everything. So people have to make judgment calls. And I think it's really important that we give people the tools that they can make risk-based judgments. And that's everything from, are we going to do this recall or not, to, are we going to approve that supplier or not? Do we need 2 suppliers or do we need 1? You know, what's our sample size at IQC for that component? Like, it's just so broad. Every decision we make every day involves an assessment of risk. So I think it's really important that that's built into the quality system as well. And if I just think then of what the challenges are that we face every day. The first one, and I'm just jumping ahead to this, is I think location. I mean, this is just a map of the main medical device companies and where they are spread. So it's you know, it's a huge challenge just to have a quality system that encompasses sites in so many locations. And then there's decisions to be made, is it a global or a local system? And the decision we have taken is that the high-risk processes like design control and CAPA, supplier controls, that they're global. Everyone has to follow it the same. But then lower level processes are local, because there are cultural change and differences, and you know, it just can't be a one-size-fits-all. Another challenge that we have is the different regulatory requirements across the globe. Now, they're definitely getting closer, but one of the aspects I would find is that, and I'm comparing a 510K product to a CE mark product, so you know, class for class, much the same. The hurdle to get the 510K, I wouldn't say it's more difficult, it's a bit more timely and there's more data needed, but certainly in the post-commercial world, the changes, we will be in much more close contact with our notified bodies on changes that the FDA just, you know, wouldn't consider to be you know, noteworthy, and it's much more, I guess, of a partnership rather than a kind of a formal notification. So I think that is certainly a difference. Supplier management has been mentioned. It's a huge challenge. So either when you're a supplier to an organisation, and then, you know, there really are quite a lot of I suppose, constraints on you on the changes you can make because the impact it could have on your customer. But likewise, you know, you have to be really in control of your suppliers, and it's your suppliers. I mean, the tiers go on right back to, you know, to the basic raw material. And service providers can't be forgotten either. And your supply chain is only, you know, it's only as strong as the weakest supplier in that chain. It's you know, an area of huge focus for FDA and for general regulatory bodies. And I think it's, you know, there's been a lot of, I suppose, high-profile food and pharma issues that is certainly having a knock-on impact on us in med devices. And I think the one that's closest to my heart is maintaining agility. You know, I think a quality system, to be effective, just, you know, like kind of abhor red tape. It just, you know, just avoid bureaucracy. And I think it can be difficult as well to avoid kind of over-engineering solutions, and I say that to group of engineers. You know, sometimes it's just, you know, a simple just fix it and move on without kind of, you know, huge projects to fix something that isn't that risk, I suppose, risky in the first place. I think that's really important. So I kind of sum it up and say that the challenge is to have an appropriate quality system. Okay, thank you.
name's Jeff Simone. I'm with Varian. And so what you just had from Juan was a great introduction into the differences that exist from the regulatory structures around the world. And then you heard from Joan a little bit about how to implement that stuff. So it's perfect because I'm the guy that brings up the back end. So you've gone through all the good work to try to make your quality system fit into all the different regulations around the world. Then you've gone through the efforts that you need to make sure you did good design work and good manufacturing work. You have a good underpinning for your supply base, and they're doing all the things they're supposed to. And then you get to the back part of this, which is what I'm going to talk about briefly, which is post-market surveillance. So all that other stuff is the planning that goes into getting your product out there and having the opportunity to make money. Because unapologetically, I hope, for me certainly, we're here to make money. And the way we do that is by helping people. And in order to do that, you got to have a good product that meets all the requirements and is safe to use and effective, right? Well, here's where the rubber meets the road. Because after you've done all that work, and hopefully you've done a really good job of it, you end up with dealing with the result of whatever it is. If it was a good product, it's fabulous. Even if it's a good product, sometimes it's not always fabulous, and if you have a bad product, it's a freaking nightmare, let me tell you. So, I'm going to talk about the things that come afterwards in the post-market surveillance. You've got adverse event reporting, and that's when you have to report to authorities for specific reasons, bad things that have happened associated with your product. Not a lot of fun, often invites questions, but it's a responsibility and you have to meet it. If you unfortunately come to determine there's something wrong with your device and that it didn't work as it was intended because it malfunctioned and may or may not have hurt somebody, you might be obligated to execute a recall. And that's where you get into stuff that's really no fun whatsoever. Then the last part of this I'm going to talk about, and it's sort of in parallel to the other two, and it depends on the rules of various countries, or arbitrary rules that might be brought upon you later. And I'll refer to the FDA's 522 rule at this point. You get post-market clinical studies where after you've gone through all the work that you were supposed to do to begin with, you get extra work assigned. You know, it's like the out-of-school homework, my least favorite thing to do. So let's talk first about the adverse events. What are they? Well, there's different ways to characterize it depending on the country in which you're operating. The one that many of you may be familiar with are medical device reports. That's what they're called in the United States. But the same concept exists in many parts of the developed world. In Canada, it's medical product reports, MPRs. In Europe, they're medical device vigilance reports. There are vigilance reports for China. Then there are various other names for the same things in Singapore, Brazil, a bunch of other countries. Okay? They're all pretty much the same. They want to know, does your device work? Did anybody get hurt? Did somebody die? Let's hope not, knock on wood. And the next question is, given all the reporting responsibilities, depending on where you've chosen to market your products, how similar are those rules? Because it turns out you can look at each one of the different sets of regulations that exist in all the different countries completely independently, and a lot of companies do this, and they can often come, by doing that process, to different conclusions on the exact same event. And by the way, for the US rules, just for example, if it happened in Europe, but you market the product in the US, you have to report it in the US, just like you had to report it in Europe. Or if it was in China, same thing applies. If it was in Europe, and you only market it in Europe, you don't have to report it anywhere other than the country in Europe where it was effective country or countries. Because once you file an MDV, it's shared by all of the other competent authorities there. So that's always fun, right? Because they're sharing information. But you have to figure out what's the most efficient and effective way so that you don't over-construct your quality system to be able to navigate all the pitfalls associated with these types of reporting. So it's important that you take that into consideration as you're going through your process and make sure you don't over-engineer it, basically. And to make it simple, I always tell folks to kind of think about it in two models. There's the US model that says, we don't care where it happened in the world, you have to tell us about it if it's with a product that's marketed here. And that model applies in several different countries around the world. However, most of the countries where they take these types of reports, they have what I would call the EU model, which is, we only want to know about it if it happens in our country, but oh, by the way, we'll send you more questions afterward. And then maybe we'll want to know where else it's happened. Okay, so those are the two models. Conceptually, you should try to, again, make it so that you are making the same decisions because even though the wording's a little different, the concepts are exactly the same. So it's something to think about and be careful of. So I'm going to move to the next one here. Yep, good, recalls. So recalls are when you have to, there's different types, and for different reasons, but in the round there's sort of two major categories you can easily think about. One is the kind that you have to tell the authorities about, wherever those authorities are and whichever ones you're talking about. And the others are the ones where you don't, but you still have to go out to your customer base and say, guess what, we really need to fix whatever this is, right? So the bad news about the first type, where you have to go tell the authorities, is that really, and this is, again, relatively universal, so it makes it easier to think about it, you have to provide the opportunity for the authorities to review whatever it is you're going to send out in advance, give them some amount of time, varies by jurisdiction, to comment on whatever it is that you wrote. So they get the opportunity to say, I don't like your letter. I want you to put in all these other things that are usually far more uncomfortable and damning and frankly probably scare your customer base more than, not often, but sometimes more than what is appropriate, and can often put a market into disarray, market meaning your customer base. Right? Not a lot of fun, so it's always good to stay away from those types of recalls if you can. And the other thing is, you got to determine and then tell those folks how you're going to rectify the problem. How are you going to make it right, both for the customer and for the patient and anybody else who's affected by it. There's different types of forms, and I put out here, fill out those different forms. So let's say you decide to do a recall. You sell your product in a multinational manner. Well, it's not just good enough that you do the Dear Doctor letter and then you get it translated into however many, 19 languages or whatever the number is that's peculiar to the devices that you're selling. But then you have to, for all these different places, fill out different types of reports that basically have the same thing reiterated a multitude of different ways. So you have to be able to figure out in a quick, efficient, effective way to be able to fill all those things out. And again, not by over-engineering the process, but by working carefully to figure out all the things that are same across those pages. It can be challenging, but it can be done. And it's important because this is one of those things you've got to get right. When, as Joan said, when they decide to come in and investigate or whatever it is, when they come review your processes and your documentation, you want to be able to show that you made good, consistent decisions throughout time, and that you've executed well and appropriately for whatever it is the issue that you're addressing takes the form of. And then you have to make sure you understand and execute the notification requirements. And by that I mean you have to understand what it is you're required in those various countries to tell your customer base and the authorities, obviously, which you just covered, because it can, again, be a little different. You should still start from a common template, though, to make it easier on yourself. Again, it's all about making a good process that's not too difficult to follow. Okay, last, post-market and clinical studies. So when you get a CE mark on a device, you're really committing to doing post-market work in advance, because that's part of the basis for getting the CE mark for a Class 2 A or B. And Class 3 devices have often more specific stuff. But even with the 2As and 2Bs, you're still saying, look, as a function of my files, I will maintain what used to be called, shoot, I hate that, just draw a blank. Clinical review, I think is what it used to be called, right? I may be wrong on that, but it was basically a document that showed you had done a review of publications about your device that said it's safe and demonstrated its effectiveness in use out in the marketplace. Clinical, thank you, there we go. I knew I said it wrong. That feature of 1345 and then more importantly in the MDD has been adjusted upward and made more challenging here over the last couple of years. So the studies are now more in depth that's being required, and they expect to see a higher level of work done by companies to continue to prove that your device in the market is safe and effective. That's in the EU. On the US, there really is, these 522 studies were set up as a function of the original, when the original device regulations were put in place. Because there were some devices they hadn't classified at that time, so they'd come back and they said, look, after the fact, we want you to go back and do more studies associated with these. And I can't recall who the first industry was to get hit with the first 522s, but I was in the second group when they came out, which was the orthopedics industry, which caused a lot of consternation. There's a lot of lack of clarity in terms of what's required to do these things, and there's a lot of provision of specific questions by the FDA to help you sort your particular post-market study. So they haven't been very well clarified in the regulation, and the guidances around them are kind of fuzzy at this point. So for those of you who are stuck doing 522s, you probably want to call around and get some assistance in getting those accomplished. And that's why I said there's still open questions in here, and experience is probably the best guide. Pay attention to this space, because it turns out there's a lot more coming in terms of regulations around the world to a market near you. The EU has thrown in some new changes to their MDD. One of those changes is now the unannounced inspections, so more similar to what the FDA has historically operated. That's starting up here this year.